Okay. So just checking in, make sure everybody can hear me. So I'm assuming my sound's good. And we decided based on the feedback from the other day that I needed a book stand. And it's so funny because I had just bought one. Um, to try to make it a little less cumbersome of having to, have my face down, and so we think that's what was the deal with the mic, so y'all let me know if this turns out a little bit better. So, without further ado, I did wanna say this one thing. I am trying behind the scenes to come up with a wiring diagram, because I understand that this entire network, there's a lot of people, and thanks to Bridget, Julie, and, Liza, they do a lot, after the show and putting links on Truth Social so people can get something additional out of it, showing the depth of the, networks, which I truly appreciate more than they will ever know. And, Raven helps her mom, with all of the footnotes and putting them out there so they're just clickable, which is a godsend as well. Um, so but I wanted to share with y'all something, and I don't know how well I'm gonna be able to do this, but, um, I want y'all to look at this. This is you see how intense this is, and do you see all the lines? Let me put it up as close as I can get it. This is 10 pages of a 400-page book, okay? 10 pages. This is the network. That's crazy. So, we've already went over this, but I just wanna show you a couple of things. You have BCCI Bank, which is right here. It used to be United Bank. It goes bankrupt. Down here, you have a bank that used to be called something else. It's then called Financial General Bank Shares. Then it becomes First American Bank Shares, and it gives birth to National Bank of Georgia, which is the Burt Lance Bank. He was Jimmy Carter's O&M guy. The people that are associated with this, you have Middendorf Group that this Jay Middendorf, who used to be the Secretary of Navy, sets up. They try to use this with Arm& Hammer, this Jorge guy, and Jackson Steven, who's Clinton's chief financial guy, to buy this bank. This bank came from General George Olmsted, who used to be the OSS, and he bought the International Bank in DC, which is that bank. Do you see how crazy that is? And by the way, what are these generals doing in the banking business? Because it's not really about banking. This is all about this money laundering network, and this guy, he was a spy, this general. He starts working for this or creates this international bank in Washington, DC, and guess what? They money launder too. And there's a whole bunch of Congress people that bank at this bank. So guess what this general has? He now has blackmail, compromised financial information. He has all of their financial statements for every loan they've ever done. Do you see how that works? That's crazy. So I just wanted to show y'all, we need to get this onto a computer system so that we can all go every story that we, read, up at the top, this system that I'm working on, I'm not building it, I'm using it. Has a search bar, so all we'll have to do is put the name up in the search bar, it pops up the little window with their name on it, and if you put your cursor over it, it immediately takes everything else and fades it to the back, and it shows you their network. So you would immediately who they're all connected to. It's gonna take me a while. Um, I may have to take a week off to try to get some, semblance of a good system going with the data, even if not all the lines are drawn. I don't know, but my head's swimming because this is huge. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and get started, and just an update on Julie. She just texted me. Um, let me bring that up real quick. Um, they were telling her, "Yes, you had a stroke. No, you didn't have a stroke." So, I'm gonna read this. God help us all. Now they're saying 50% carotid artery, but it's not the cause, and they're not entirely sure. So they are thinking maybe embolism caused it, even though they are not sure. He is thinking, um, do they wanna do another MRI? Um, she's definitely having a hard time with the whole thing because she's trying not to, allow them to do of course, they wanted to do a COVID test immediately, which she wouldn't allow them to do because she doesn't have COVID. And, um, anyway, she's gonna be excited because we have 572 followers. Julie's, did all the heavy lifting, to get us to 500, so, good on her. Alright, let's get started. So, we have, we're in chapter 7, and we're up to the part about Black Eagle. Black Eagle is about, the Kerry Commission yeah, John Kerry, that guy, who had a commission, and we know now, based on our research, that commissions are where things go to die. They're not actually gonna solve anything. Um, his commission was on terrorism, narcotics, and international operations that went on in the 1990s. So, what I found interesting, and I just did an article on the Awan brothers, they and keep in mind they're from Pakistan, right? So, BCCI executive and we know BCCI is the bank that the international syndicate set up to do the CIA money laundering for Operation Gladio and all of the other international crimes they're committing. BCCI had an executive by the name of Amjad, Amjad Awad, and one of the Awan brothers that was here is like Amrod, like just one letter different. So, I'm thinking they may be related. We probably need a researcher to check into that. Um, anyway, this Awan that's in the, um, Whitney Webb's book was called to testify, and he told the commission that he had acted as the banker for, Manuel Noriega, the Panama guy. So, he also says that Noriega would, deposit $3,000,000 at a time in $100 bills in the BCCI bank, while Awan would disperse the $20,000 payments to Panamanian politicians at Noriega's request. So, basically, this is money laundering 101 and obviously implicates Awan, um, BCCI and Awan. Uh, Clark Clifford, who we have on our little, chart here, Clark Clifford is the guy that donated heavily to the Carter, Center after Carter. He also was in on funding and creating, the Financial General Bank shares, the company that was in Georgia that got taken over, by BCCI. So, Clark Clifford's partner, Robert Altman, had intervened to obscure the flow of Noriega connected funds into BCCI because, of course, nothing flows directly from anything. They set up shell companies, in order to move the money around. In this Noriega network, we have, the Medellin cartel boss, Carlos Blake, Lehder. We also have, Robert Vesco, who keeps popping up. Robert Vesco is at the center of a lot of this, blackmail, money laundering, drug trade. So, Noriega reaches an agreement with the cartel people that uses Panama as a transshipment point for Colombian cocaine destined for the US, and he's basically skimming money off of every shipment. You also have, Stephen Kalish, Kalish, who's an American drug smuggler, and he worked closely with Noriega's pilot, Cesar Rodriguez. Kalish was a partner in a Panamanian airline owned by Rodriguez and Noriega. They used special military, kind of authority, if you will, in order to fly the drugs around. Noriega was 100% a CIA asset. He had been since 1967, it's as far back as it can be traced. He was very close to George Bush Sr. when the president became the CIA director. Um, CIA Director George Bush arranged to pay Noriega $110,000 for his services and also put him up as a house guest of the deputy CIA director when he came to town. So, Noriega was kind of in there tight with this whole group of, people. He also was in the middle of the Nicaraguan Contra arrangement. That name was the name of that operation was called Black Eagle, and there was an article in the Rolling Stones in 1989 that referred to this Black Eagle operation, saying Casey recruited Israel's Mossad, quote, "to arrange for the acquisition and shipping of weapons to the Contras," unquote. Welcome, the prophet. Um, Also, Mossad had its own guy in Panama by the name of Michael Harari, and we've come across his name in Operation Gladio book reviews as well. Harari worked as an arms trafficker and security consultant for Noriega. So you've got the CIA in there, and you've got Israel's Mossad in there. And while she doesn't go into it, almost every place you have these people, you also have MI6, um, and Germany's BND. They kind of all form their own little intel networks in all of these countries. So the Harari network was um, overlapped with our drug smuggling network, and there are people out there that try to make the case that some of these people are not any longer with these intel organizations when they're performing these international trips, which unequivocally is not true. Um, Harari, while they're trying to tell us he wasn't on the Mossad payroll, was given $20 million from Israel to do these operations. You also have a Jose Blanton, one of Noriega's top advisors, who later told journalists that Harari had worked with Duane Claridge, the head of CIA operations in Latin America, and Donald Gregg. Um, Donald Gregg, if you remember, we've talked about him, is Vice President Bush's national security advisor. So this is during the Reagan administration. He was also responsible for logistical support of the whole Contra fiasco. So, vice president office is basically playing a role in Operation Black Eagle, and their guy on the ground is Bush Senior's national security advisor in the White House. So, they have airstrips in Panama utilizing the CIA, um, and working with the Medellin cartel. And so when these people try to tell you that, the cartel's responsible for the drugs, um, tell anybody that says that to you a big bullshit, because we are controlling all of this. They are worker bees along the drug route. They're not controlling anything. So, the prime years for Operation Black Eagle were in the early '80s, um, and there was a lot going on in all of Latin America, not just in Nicaragua, and you have a lot of articles if you actually research, that were written and unequivocally, you have the CIA and Mossad in here. Um, I'm gonna quote from another book. "W While helping to raise funds for the Contras, Noriega was pursuing a favorite pastime, adding to his store of political blackmail material, an insatiable collector of negative information about both friends and foes. Noriega is known to have hidden video and audio equipment in government offices to record meetings and phone calls. Early in blackmail operations, according to Blanton, Noriega began to compile a dossier about the role of Bush and his staff. In the dossier is said to have copies of status reports sent to Craig and videotapes of meetings held in Noriega's office, plus a special report that Blanton prepared about Black Eagle on Noriega's orders. So every single bit of this, there is a large scale mutual blackmail apparatus that has been created and used by every single body in the international syndicate, which is my name for this entire group of nasty, evil people. So, the Contra, issue in Nicaragua becomes increasingly bitter here in the United States, and is there's lots of conversation. So, in 1984, Congress passes the Bolin Amendment, which prohibits all US military aid to the Contras, and it hampered the CIA for the part that they actually apply, listen to what laws actually say, because they don't know. They couldn't basically what this is translated as saying is they couldn't no longer use O&M money, which is our taxpayer dollars. They were gonna have to dip into their black, um, lon money laundered money to do the operations. That's basically what the law, said. So, he reaches out to Oliver North, and they basically set up a thing that they referred to as the Enterprise. The Enterprise was basically, um, a money-making endeavor, according to Whitney. Now, those of you who've been with me through Operation Gladio understand that the money-making venture has always been there. They have, since they started in the late 1940s, been marketing opium. They just changed the location based on where the war is. So, if we're gonna go to war in Korea, that's where we're gonna grow poppy. If we're gonna go to war in Vietnam, we're gonna grow poppy there. If we're gonna go to war in Afghanistan, we're gonna, because hey, if you have a war going on where you're producing the opium, it's much easier to get the opium in and out because you just do it on military aircraft and you don't have to go to that extra expense. So, there's a lot of thought that went into this whole apparatus. Um, so so she acts as if they go into every individual separate operation and figure out how they gotta generate funds. They have a never-ending supply of funds marketing black market weapons, black market opium, and black market people. So, into the mix is thrown, people from Shackley. Y'all remember the ghost Ted Shackley, from the CIA and the OSS days, his private military apparatus that we went through in the last chapter. Part of that was Richard Secord, who also was a military person. Um, he had been involved in the overbilling scam at the Pentagon for the delivery of military, um, product, and they were basically skimming money off the top. So, along with Secord, you have Albert Hakim, Hakim, another one of Shackley's buddies, as well as Thomas Klein, Clines. So, all of these people are old buddies from the, um, other CIA operations, some going back to the OSS days. So, they're having meetings about Iran and the Nicaraguans. So North, um, was recruited into this network in the '80s when he joined the National Security. He came in right in the middle of Black Eagle, and working with the Panama and setting up that whole drug trafficking. So he becomes Robert Bud McFarland's, assistant, and McFarland, for those of you who don't know, you have and maybe we'll get into that on a different show, but McFarland, Poindexter, McCain, um, the Senator Webb from Virginia all went to the Naval Academy together. All of them have an interwoven, um, network, and they wrote a book about it. It's called I believe it's the Nightingale Song, and that entire, um, group, uh, just crazy looking back on it, how all of them turned out evil, doing crazy things. All of them spent a lot of time in the military, and every one of them was dirty. So, it's funny now that every time something comes up, whether it's, Tony Bobulinski, where did he go? Naval Academy. Um, the, uh, oh gosh, my mind just went blank. I just have a different appreciation now, is our military academies, another one of those recruiting grounds where you observe people and you get to psychologically evaluate them as to how they may play a role in this, international syndicate, because there does seem to be as opposed to any other recruiting source, um, I graduated through ROTC, we also have direct commissioning, officer training school. You don't see a lot of officers. We see a lot of military in the international syndicate. You do not see a lot of officers that are not academy grad in the international syndicate. It's just a trend, and again, one of the things that I have said repeatedly throughout this entire thing, we have to get better at recognizing patterns, because patterns is how you can trace the thing back to its root and get rid of it for real, not just kinda put a Band-Aid on it. So, I'm just gonna leave that there. Um McFarlane becomes Henry Kissinger's military assistant and went with him on several secret trips to China when Henry Kissinger was trying to sell all of our jobs to China. In the 1970s, McFarlane was appointed by John Tower, who was head of the US Senate Committee for the Armed Forces, um, and he was appointed by Oh, and he also became an assistant to Alexander Haig. Tower's critical role in the subversion of the U.S. national security was aided by Robert Maxwell in the Promise scandal. And for those of you who don't know, that was a software system that the Department of Justice stole from Inslaw um, Company and sold it to the CIA and Mossad for them to be able to hide their own money laundering, but get blackmail material on everybody else money laundering. That's it, and there's a lot more to it. Um, Power and Maxwell had been first brought together by Henry Kissinger. God bless him. He's with the devil now. McFarland's Earlier work with Kissinger had been arranged by his mentor, Colonel Jack Brennan, who served as Nixon's last chief of staff. I had somebody ask me yesterday if I thought Nixon was good or bad. Nixon was definitely bad, and whether or not he knew anything about Operation Gladio. Operation Gladio was set up during the Eisenhower administration, so he 100% knew everything about it because he was Eisenhower's vice president. North, while working under McFarland, was introduced to Brennan's associate, a guy by the name of Lieutenant Colonel James Tully. Tully had worked closely with both Shapley, from the OSS days and Richard Secord. So, so many military people involved in this, and it's just so disturbing on so many levels. Um, Another CIA asset by the name of William Corson worked with, North on these Noriega, uh, Nicaragua, Iran, Contra garbage. Um, and so Whitney then goes into an entire segment of what the structure of the enterprise looks like. Um, the basis for the enterprise was a company founded by Richard Secord and Albert Hakim in 1983 called Stanford Technology Trading Group. We're going to hear about that one again. Um, Stanford Technology Trading Group. It's a CIA company. They formed nearly an identical company in the 1970s called Stanford Technology Corporation, which was another company. So that one was formed in '70, and then in '83, they formed Stanford Technology Trading Group International. That's why names matter. Um, Also, there had been other ones set up in the '70s, all kind of using those same words. A year later, the Stanford Technology Trading Group International, um, a year after it was formed, a guy by the name of Adolfo Calero, who was the leader of one of the Contra groups, um, got involved in this, company, and they got sizable cash donations from Saudi Arabia to buy arms and resell them to the Contra. So realize what we just covered last yesterday on the whole BCCI, where you have the Saudi Arabians, um, contributing large amounts of money to the creation of the BCCI, which is the Pakistani bank. You have Saudi Arabia, who has made inroads into Houston, Texas, into the Bush network. Um, all of this is going on, and Saudi Arabia is throwing a lot of money around at all of this, international syndicate, creation. The basic business arrangement, rapidly ballooned during 1985 and '86, um, and Israel's David Kimche, can't make that name, Kimche, and Michael Ledeen, Ledeen, meet several times about the possibility of, um, how Israel, Iran, and the US was gonna work, um, and supply US arms packages to Iran to include 100 tow missiles, and they did that via Israel. And Aiden Khashoggi was right in the middle of it and used his bank accounts at BCCI to hide all of the money. So, Ladine, who was operating from Nor's office in the National Security Council, was doing all of this stuff. He also was trying to free hostages that were being held in Lebanon. McFarland told President Reagan that Israel had taken it upon themselves to sell arms to Iran in order to try to get the hostages released, which was not true. Um, Records show that North was tasked with handling the whole, um, liaisoning with Israel and, um, the funding part of this. So North was holding meetings with Ladine and the Israeli guy, Also a guy by the name of Al Schwimmer, Schwimmer, and there were other peoples on the Israeli side that was part of the arms selling. In January of '86, uh, the operation then kind of goes into high gear where you have a meeting of Oliver North, Edwin Meese, who is the, attorney general, and Amiram Nir, N-I-R. Israeli Prime Minister Shimon Peres's top counterterrorism advisor is NIR, Nir, reportedly suggested to North that funds from the arms sales could be diverted to help the Contras. Funds now destined for the Contras began to be routed through the enterprise's shell companies. So they're pushing off on Israel as coming up with that idea for the first time. Part of the money laundering included corporations called Energy Resources International, Lake Resources Incorporated, and Hyde Square Park Corporation. North's Israeli co-conspirators may have had access to all of those same accounts. They set up a Swiss bank account at Credit Suisse in order to, do the paying for this. A guy by the name of Willard Zucker and a Geneva company that he worked for that's got a crazy name, like Campaign de Services Fiduciary. They call it CSF. Zucker was a US tax lawyer. He had provided Hakim with financial services since the mid-70s when Hakim was still living in Iran. And Hakim, by the way, is a very, very rich Iranian, like a billionaire. Um, they were also affiliated with a company that we've talked about several times called Investor Overseas Services, OIS. So, um, Zucker had a seat on the OIS board, uh, while they were getting rid of the guy who actually created that by the name of Bernard Kornfeld. Zucker was one of Vesco's proxies who he arranged to get on the iOS board. Zucker's role in Vesco's takeover of iOS, um, in a letter he wrote to Hakeem concerning a trip he took to Seattle to discuss a series of business ventures with enterprise partners. Zucker states in a letter that he had met a businessman from Colorado who was involved in a venture with a oil politically connected oil man by the name of John M. King, King. He offered to send Zucker materials relating to the venture, but Zucker declined. Hakim, um, he added to Hakim that King hated his guts because he had brought down King's resource, the Colorado Corporation. So in all of this, you see a lot of this, where you have these people that are in the, enterprise, as they refer to it in here, I call it international syndicate, that get crosswise with each other because you can't keep your cheating straight. So, going back or up in June 1982, you have CSF, which is our, um, Geneva company, set up a Bermuda subsidiary called CSF Investment Limited. The legal work for this was carried out by a company that we've come across before, Conyers, Dill, and Pearman, one of the preeminent firms specializing in offshore finance in the Caribbean, London, and Hong Kong. The firm's co-founder, Nicholas Dill, D-I-L-L, was a powerful presence in Bermuda politics. His law partner, James Pearman, Pearman, were directors in coastal Caribbean oils and material. So Secord owned stock in this company, so most likely that's just more front companies for the CIA. Contra transport operations were um, fully underway at this point, and the CSF investments were going to be used to acquire aircraft for the ferrying around of the money, the weapons, and whatever else they need to have ferried around. So, the Enterprise obviously injects Southern Air Transport, which is the CIA proprietary airline, and would be used in addition to that. It previously had been Air America, and before that, Civil Air Transport when they were over in Vietnam. So, closely they're working closely with the Enterprise, all of these different, entities. Another company that was registered in Panama as a front company was Albon, ALBON, Values Corporation. It was written about in the Wall Street Journal saying, "Public records in Panama City list employees in the um, Genevieve Geneva firm CSF as principals in Albon Values Corporation. Roland Farina, Farina, an accountant at CSF, and Jacques Mozzaz, Mozzaz, an attorney at a Swiss firm, are listed as the principal authors of this Albon, ALBON company that was registered in Panama. It was also frequently used by the CSF, so it's basically just another front company, intel agencies. Costa Rica was one of the main staging grounds for all of this, and you have a guy by the name of John Hall, who's an American rancher who bought a huge ranch down in Costa Rica, and it just so happened to be next to the airfield where they're flying all of these flights out for paramilitary groups. I'm sure that's just and the fact that he was from Texas, I'm sure that's all just a coincidence, and probably if we dug very deep, we'd find a connection between John Hall and the Bushes and the bakers and blah, 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 and everybody else in the, Texas mafia. So, um, interesting, I found this here. Hall was also reportedly close to Free Costa Rica movement, that country's branch of the World Anti-Communist League. And what did we tell you? Anytime you hear the words World Anti-Communist League, it means it's Operation Gladio. So, they're telling you right here that Costa Rica's element of the Operation Gladio was called Free Costa Rica Movement. That's just something we need to put down because I am keeping track of what every country's names for their Operation Gladio units are, because it's gonna be important later on, I can tell. In frequent contact with Hall was a guy by the name of Robert Owen. Um, he was selected by North to serve as a liaison to the Contras. He's also part of Shackley's network, and, they all met through Neil Livingstone, which we've, um, talked about before. Livingstone was involved in Panama with Michael Harari and the Operation Black Eagle. So Owen also served as senator, on the staff of Senator Dan Quayle. Livingstone recruited him to work with Gray, that PR firm we've heard about, several chapters ago, um, that basically says that Gray is in service to the CIA running PR campaigns or propaganda campaigns. So, just another circle that she just drew. The PR campaign for the Contras, um, was done through a cutout called Institute for Terrorism and Subnational Conflict. Where they come up with that name at. It was created and, offices were in Washington, DC, in part of the American Security Council. So, let's see. Also set up was, by Owen was an organization called Institute for Democracy, Education, and Assistance, nicknamed IDEA. IDEA was formed, this on the same day that IDEA was formed, Owen set up a sister group called Council for Democracy, Education, and Assistance. One of the council's directors, aside from Owen, was a retired Air Force General, John Flynn. He had been recruited by Hull to serve in this role. The council took $66,000 in donations for the Contras, as part of the fundraising. Um, a guy by the name of Carl Spitz Chanel, um, had organized a tax-exempt foundation to solicit all of these donations. This foundation, the National Endowment for the Preservation of Liberty, was North's vehicle of choice for garnering private donations for the Contras. Now let that sink in for just a second. You have these people, to include military officers, who are using a entity called the National Endowment for the Preservation of Liberty to run weapons to an organization in Latin America that is overthrowing the government. Nothing screams liberty like running drugs and running guns. So, National Endowment for the Preservation of Liberty, but it sounds good when you're writing checks. Wealthy donors courted by North and his associates were people like Texas ah, Texas oilman Robert Bunker Hunt, Ellen Garwood, the daughter of the New Deal heir, uh, E. Trine Starn. Came across his name before, I've never actually looked him up. Um, Chanel's partner was a PR man by the name of Richard Miller, and they maintained a company called International Business Communications. Money from the National Endowment for the Preservation of Liberty would flow into international business communication, which then would take the money and put it in accounts in the Cayman Islands, like under the name of a company called IC Inc. That's it. They would then move money to the Switzerland accounts belonging to Lake Resources. So basically, they're just money laundering. That's what they're doing to buy weapons. They're money laundering. And you got to do it when you're doing something illegal. So another funding source was through was Citizens for America. That was founded by Louis Learman, and it was ran by Jack Abernoff. Citizens for America executives met personally with Ronald Reagan. The organization would reappear in the Franklin child abuse scandal in Nebraska, where Larry King, the man that was at the center of the sexual abuse, was a board member and a donor to Citizens for America. And keep in mind that the Franklin child abuse scandal was where they were flying in uh, little kids into the White House when Bush was president. In 1985, cracks in the Bolin Amendment start to form where Congress was still trying to block lethal aid, but allow humanitarian aid in. So, as soon as you hear that happening, what that means is that everything that's gonna go in under humanitarian isn't humanitarian at all. It's kinda just a cycle they go through, and sure enough, she goes through and she starts documenting, um, a firm by the name of Ocean Hunter that was set up, and they're ferrying drugs around, and things are labeled as humanitarian, but they're basically, weapons. So, you have, um let's get up to I wanted to bring in another guy, Frank Moss, who was a pilot for this organization called SETCO, SETCO Aviation. SETCO had a long-standing relationship with the Contra groups, which is the Honduras-based FDN, the aviation company. flew Honduran cocaine trafficker Juan Mata Ballestero around, um, and let's see, Mata, as he refers to him, is the boss of all bosses of Mexico's cocaine industry, and he had overtaken the Medellin, cartel as the dominant drug empire in Colombia. So, his organization, Guadalajara, were implicated in the kidnapping, interrogation, brutal torture, and murder of DEA agent Enrique Kiki, Camarena. I don't know if you read about that, that's awful. That's absolutely awful. And again, as she points out here, the CIA knew that that DEA agent was in captivity. They knew he was being tortured, and they didn't do anything about it, and she goes through the details here. I'm not gonna go through all of them. The CIA is evil, I'm just saying. They knew that man was there when he was still alive and had the wherewithal to get him out, and they did not do it. Um, so under the humanitarian aid, they set up a company called Vortex, a Miami-based aviation company ran by Michael B. Palmer. Vortex was getting these humanitarian contracts for supply runs. Palmer was under active investigation by the FBI in 3 jurisdictions in connection with his decades-long drug smuggling. He had been indicted in Detroit, and yet they were using him to fly humanitarian aid. Joseph Haas was suspected of involvement in drug trafficking as well, because he had already been investigated for marijuana trafficking in 1984. He had been a CIA contract agent that had been taken off the CIA payroll in 1987 because he had gone to work for another US law enforcement agency. Okay. Um, Vortex, was brought to the humanitarian aid entity's attention by Pat Foley. Pat Foley is described in the Kerry Commission report as the president of Summit Aviation. What that report left out, because they're there to hide stuff, not report it or investigate, was that Foley had been, or continued to be, in my estimation, a CIA operative and had flown 747s on behalf of the Flying Tigers set up by the Chennaults and Robert Gray, and maintained a spot on the board of Summit Aviation. S Summit Aviation had also been founded by Richard DuPont Jr., a member of the illustrious DuPont family, which is in Delaware. Um, Besides Summit, Richard Jr. served as the director of Edward DuPont's Atlantic Aviation, where the aforementioned CIA asset and Bush ally James Bath had served as the vice president. So basically, another circle. You have the people that were doing CIA operations in Vietnam and Burma and Laos and Cambodia via the Flying Tigers. That same group is now brought in, and they create Summit Aviation, and you have they're using Summit Aviation, which was, founded by Richard DuPont, and remember that all of these, like Arm& Hammer, we just went through an entire area where Arm& Hammer figured prominently in the whole banking setup of the BCCI and BCCI illegally buying banks in the United States. If you go back to the creation of the OSS was the elite playground where the uppities like John Foster Dulles and Alan Dulles, and I mean, there's a whole load of them, movie stars all go, and play out their fantasy wartime scenarios in the OSS clandestine spy. So today, Actors, singers that do international activity are always debriefed by the CIA. So, whether they're actually actively collecting intel, on their way over, they are most certainly debriefed on their way back. You have so many of the international syndicate looking like legitimate businesses, um, but all of them appears to have some element or body part in the CIA. So, moving on to the next area, Singlaub, which is Singlaub, we've talked about him before, and a entity called Geo Milli Tech. A bombing attempt carried out by Summit Aviation foreshadowed some later activities of the enterprise, i.e., the CIA. In this case, the Civilian Materiel Assistance, CMA, which was a militia group, um, which served as a cover story for the 20th Special Forces Group. Now, this is exactly how they carry out Operation Gladio activities. They create what looks like a militia group. They dress up people in uniforms or dress, which they are not. So if these are 20th Special Forces Group people dressed up as civilians pretending to be a militia group, this is the hallmark of Operation Gladio. So you have that, um, and this entity, um, Civilian Materiel Assistance, is going to be used for cross-border raids with Contra forces in Honduras into Nicaragua, okay? So, the Civilian Military Assistance militia group was revealed in 1984 when one of their helicopters was shot down, killing 2 of the group members, like that get that phone call as a military mom. Thomas Posey continued the Contra support operations that were linked to this because they were taking place at that John Paul's ranch that was in Costa Rica from John Hall's a Texan. So, closely working with the CMA entity and the CIA was General John Singlaub. He's a veteran OSS from the China network. He's a buddy of Paul Helliwell's. He's a buddy of E. Howard Hunt, from all of those OSS, Southeast Asia. Paul Helliwell and E. Howard Hunt was in on the Castro thing. E. Howard Hunt was in on the Nixon, Watergate thing. These guys have got their fingers in everything. So, Singlaub was reportedly, let's see, in the '80s, Singlaub headed the US Council for World Freedom. Yeah, that sounds like another one of those anti-communist things. The US branch of a global network of spies, criminals, Nazi exiles oh, look at that, and fascist operators and death squad leaders belonging to the World Anti-Communist League. See, we always get back to that. You can just spot them just like that now. Um, so this is Operation Gladio right here. In 1984, he was chairman of the league. So Singlaub is a gladiator. Um, prior to that, he was involved with a guy by the name of Roger Pearson, an anthropologist with ties to that same group. Um, and he also was involved in a group called Liberty Lobby. A Swiss attorney, Pierre, I'm not even gonna try to say that guy's name, Schiffferli, Schifferly, who was rumored to have been involved in arranging massive weapons deals for UNITA in Angola. Okay, so UNITA we've also came across. That's another Operation Gladio. Um, when he was when he wasn't arranging falsified end user certificates for arms transferring, um, He was involved in the Pinochet Foundation, and who is Pinochet? Pinochet is the dictator they installed in Chile when the CIA overthrew their duly elected president. Again, that was an Operation Gladio too. So Schifferle worked with as one of the attorneys retained by Bruce Rappaport to represent his bank called Inter Maritime Bank, which is also a money laundering bank. The World Anti-Communist League and the U.S. Council for World Freedom were interlaced with a host of like-minded pressure groups, dark money fronts, private intel apparatuses, and had a lot of closed-door meetings. Supposedly under the auspices of rolling back the Cold War policies and boosting defense spending to fight communism. Um, they pushed for continuation of covert wars, free trade policies, and packages beneficial to multinational corporations and curtailing civil and labor rights. The American Security Council appeared to have participated in psychological operations aimed at domestic populations of the U.S. Council for National Policy helped broker the cozy relationship between evangelical Christians and the emerging new right. But it's not new right, it's actually fascist. High Frontier lobbied for the SDI initiative during the Reagan years. The U.S. Strategy Council brought together intel operatives and representatives of the Unification Church, according to the Washington Red Times. The World Anti-Communist League was the Western Goals found. Oh, in addition to the Anti-Communist League, you had the Western Goals Foundation, which was a private intelligence outfit set up by Congressman Larry McDonald in 1978. Donald envisioned Western Goals as a clearinghouse, I bet, for private groups, law enforcement agencies to collect and share information on domestic groups. This has been going on for a very long time. They engaged in propaganda via book publishing. We've known that for a very long time. We've heard talk about, because it was actually written in some of the Q drops, about how book publishing is a scam. It's another way that they launder money to people to pay them off for whatever it is, whether you passed a law, you signed a law, whatever. Um, People who don't get book deals, um, are oftentimes not getting book deals because they didn't play the game right. Western Goals fell under control of Spitz Chanel, who was doing private fundraising on behalf of the country Contras. So Western Goals' efforts to create a database on American subversives would be realized as part of the continuity of government protocol, which was developed by key players in the enterprise in Iran-Contra, and we discuss that more in chapter 9, because it has a lot to do with the Promise, scandal, which the DOJ was involved in. Western Goals letter from 1983 lists a number of individuals comprising their advisory board. So here's a list of everybody that wants to spy on you way back in the early 1980s. And keep in mind, this was done during the Reagan administration when we all thought Reagan was a good guy. John Steengleb himself was on there, and John Steengleb, military, Admiral Thomas Moorer, Moorer, another military guy. At this point, Moorer had worked both with American Security Council and the PR firm of Gray. Another advisor, Roy Cohn. How about that? That guy just keeps coming up. Cohn had joined the foundation after being satisfied that it had no ties to the right-wing John Birch Society, despite Western Goals founder Larry McDonald having been a John Birch leader. Cohn's fellow advisory board member was Roger Milliken, who had actually funded the society. Yeah, sure, Roy. No ties to John Birch at all. Cohen's interest in Western goals may have been tied to a wider pro-Contra network or just to get blackmail material, because Cohen was notorious for blackmail. At the time, Cohen was serving as an attorney to Rupert Murdoch. So let that sink in for just a second. Whitney likes to point out the fact that Roy Cohn was a mentor to Donald Trump. Roy Cohn was Rupert Murdoch's attorney. Whenever Roy wanted a story stopped, he just called Rupert. After Rupert bought the New York Post, Cohn wielded the paper like his own personal newspaper. Cohn was forging close ties with the director of the U.S. Information Agency, Chad Wick, which is a CIA front entity. A luncheon in Wick's honor was held and had influential figures from all the conservative press. But they're actually working for the CIA. CIA Director William Casey was spearheading an extensive propaganda campaign to shore up support for Reagan's Latin America policy. Inside the United States, propaganda, totally illegal at the time. Yes, I'm familiar with Barack Obama's bullshit. So, um, Wick promised to find private support. Rome brought Cohn brought Rupert Murdoch to the White House to talk about the Iran-Contra support. Documents released during the Iran-Contra scandal in 1987 and later from the Reagan Library indicate that Murdoch was soon viewed as a source of private funding for the propaganda campaign. Murdoch became the top media ally of the Casey-directed propaganda effort and also became increasingly close to the Reagan White House. Murdoch, as a consequence, greatly benefited greatly from Reagan's policies, so much so that Murdoch increased his U.S. media holdings to create the Fox Broadcasting Corporation in 1987. Let that sink in for just a second. That's crazy crap. Salem was named as a consultant to a Florida-based Tech Consultants Corporation. This had been put together by Barbara Studley, a beauty queen and conservative talk show host in Florida. She used to work at the Pentagon. That's a likely combination, said no one ever. Studley may have even set up the GMT as the Geo Militech Consultants at the behest of Singlo, so another front company. So they're gonna put a pretty face on a company set up in 1983 when actually it's a front company. GMT worked with various arm dealers to source and transport munitions both to Nicaragua and to Afghanistan. So you have, um, a guy by the name of Ernest Warner Glatt and a partner, Samuel Cummings, involved in this longtime weapon merchant CIA, um, uh, enterprise. Cummings' brother-in-law was none other than Senator John Tower. Senator excuse me, Senator John Tower is basically a CIA agent posing as a senator at this point, I'm convinced. Um, Tower, in December of '86, was tapped by Reagan to oversee the initial inquiry into, guess what? The Iran-Contra affair. The guy that's been in the Iran-Contra affair throughout the entire Iran-Contra affair and everything before that as it relates to the CIA is gonna get tasked to investigate it. Told you, every single one of those things is bullshit. Tower at the time was close to Robert Maxwell, who is an arms dealer and working for the Israeli intelligence. Maxwell had secured Tower a place on the payroll of Israeli intelligence, and he's gonna look into the Iran-Contra, which was part of Israel's doing as well. Why did not ever get talked about? So, GMT had close ties with Israel. The outfit's vice president, Ron Harrell, Harel, was a veteran of the Israeli Air Force. He specialized in tactical cargo and light and early warning aircraft. He, he managed all of GMT's overseas offices, to include the one located in Tel Aviv. A sister company to GMT, Global Technology Limited, was stationed in Israel and overseen by Joel Arnon, Arnon, an Israeli diplomat and military officer who was also vice president of GMT. That's so convenient when the CIA and Mossad do all of their business together. It just makes planning so much easier. So they were located in Tel Aviv's Asia House, which was full of diplomats and embassies, right where the CIA would wanna be. The Asia House was owned by Israeli billionaire Shaul Eisenberg, who enjoyed close relationships to both Israeli intelligence and its security apparatus. I bet every one of those rooms was bugged. GMT's Israeli offices utilized the banking services of Israel Discount Bank. In '86, portions of the money that was provided to the Ocean Hunter part of the Iran-Contra was deposited in Israeli Discount Bank. So, the ties between GMT and the activities of Robert Maxwell and all of those in their orbit had a key figure by the name of Nicholas Davies, a globe-trotting foreign editor for Maxwell's Daily Mirror. He was nicknamed Mr. Sneaky because think about this, if you're a spy for Israel, which Robert Maxwell unequivocally was, and you're doing business selling a flawed software program that spies on worldwide banking, which he did, you having, you owning one of the largest media empires in London would provide you with the perfect network via international reporters who do spying. I'm convinced at this point that 95, if not as close as 99% of all media companies and their employees that travel, not the guy that's the, sound technician, um, are spies. That's the whole joke on us. None of them are actually, and we laugh and we look at the ones that are on TV and go, "Yeah, they're, um, drank the Kool-Aid or they're part of the, international syndicate." But I think it's much deeper than that. The way you control information is you control the people that gather the information, and Robert Maxwell controlled a huge media empire. So does Rupert Murdoch, and he can control it all. So, um, where are we? Alright. The Daily Mirror, um, has this guy by the name of Davies, um, acted as a manager and representative of a company called Ora Group, which is an Israeli company based in London. It was headquartered in Davies' actual home. Ora was set up with the aid of Ari Ben Menashe, Menashe, and operated as a keynode of the global arms trafficking network, the guy that's supposedly a reporter. Um, so they received arms in the case weapons from Soviet bloc countries. A lot of it came from Bulgaria. We learned that in the Operation Gladio books. Um, and let's see, documents in question about allegations made, when he traveled to, when Davies traveled to Ohio, um, for this clandestine meeting. Supposedly, he didn't ever travel there, but then they found afterward the fact that there was lots of documents that said, yes, in fact, he had been there. Um, there was, telex from Davies to a renowned American arms merchant by the name of Richard Benecke, Breneke. Um, he managed an offshore financial apparatus, utilized by American and Israeli intelligence assets in the Operation Black Eagle that we just went over, and he would later say, that he had met Davies, but then supposedly Davies tried to tell us that he had never typical spy lies. So, you have a bunch of shadow companies that she goes into on the Robert Maxwell, um, uh, portion of the enterprise, them doing, uh, banking at the Union Bank of Switzerland, another company in Switzerland, um, and the fact that there's quite a bit of GMT in Switzerland. Um, in the summer of '85, GMT is involved in acquisition of arms on behalf of the Contras. Studley and Singla arranged a $5 million shipment of AK-47s and RPG grenade launchers from Europe to Honduras on board a 15,000-ton Greek flagged freighter. These arms came right there, Poland and Bulgaria. Um, we learned a lot in Operation Gladio about the Bulgarian arms trade, um, so it's not hard to call, once you know the story. So you have, arms dealers by the name of Mario Dell'Amico and a Florida arms dealer by the name of Ron Martin, who are part of this whole, prior Soviet armament shipments, and you have a guy by the name of General Daniel Graham, the vice president of Singlab's US Council for World Freedom and a close associate of the Unification Church, attending a meeting with CIA Director Casey. An unnamed CIA officer who was present at the meeting was asked by congressional investigators if there was any talk of three-way trading scheme, meaning basically the Iran-Contra, whole thing. And, let's see, Israel would sell certain things, military equipment to the People's Republic of China, who would supply Soviet arms, which would then be brokered. Israel would be benefited by the US high-tech support or other compensation. So, here's what they're saying, here's the three-way. The, um, the Israel would sell certain military stuff to China. China would take old Soviet equipment to be sent, like, to, the Nicaraguans, and then Israel would take information, high-tech information, and backfill China. So, you will find a lot, and there are people I've read, 2 books now that actually accuse a little bit of an echo, sorry about that. Is that hopefully that's better. There are, um, people that believe Israel's, um, nuclear program Israel couldn't test nuclear weapons. We all know that they have a nuclear program, but it would be too obvious in their tiny little spot to test nuclear weapons. While they were developing the technology on the stealth, there are people that believe that they used China to test that technology in exchange for allowing them to have some of that technology. Now, I don't know whether that's true. I've read 2 different books. There is a lot of documentation that suggests that that is true. Um, so coming across this arrangement where you have China, us, and Israel doing this weapons deal is basically exactly what was depicted in those other books. So it leads credence to the fact that Israel has no problem giving China technology that they got from us. And keep in mind, not too long before this is when all of the Israeli spies were being caught in the United States, right? Just saying. And one other thing for anybody watching, when I talk about as a US military officer retired about a state doing something, I am not talking about people. The US government has been evil. I'm one of the people in the United States as a citizen. They did not represent you or me in doing evil. When we talk about Israel, we're talking about the state, not the people. When we talk about the UK, we're talking about the state, not the people. I wanna make that clear. So, the trading arrangement of those 3 people, basically provided aid to Afghanistan, Angola, Nicaragua, Cambodia, um, Honduras. So, they also the US, Israel, and China were involved in credit extensions, technology transfers, and arms deals. That's the bottom line. So, um, the Israel and China, uh, economic and political relationships continues to develop throughout the 1980s. Um, Jeffrey Epstein was later alleged to have been involved in arms deals that included the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. Um, he may have facilitated major facets of something very similar to GMT, US, Israel, China plan in collaboration with members of the Clinton White House, Chinese weapons firms, and Southern Air Transport in the mid-1990s, and she's gonna talk about that a little bit more in a future chat. Um, there was a lot more to, um, Epstein's visit to the Clinton White House than just child trafficking. That becomes very clear. Um, GMT other claims to fame was that it appears to have been involved in some of the very first arms deals with Iran. It predated the, um, Oliver North enterprise setup, um, but took place with the CIA and Mossad. Um, the plan was a swap trade 20 tanks for Iran's US-built see, trade 200 tanks for Iran's US-built F-14 fighter aircraft, unquote, which had been sold to Iran in the 1970s. Israel would have served as a cutout for the tanks. It's quite possible the scheme originated on the Israeli side the first thing that Ron Harold had been involved in when he joined this GMT company. The groundwork for later arms for hostages arrangements, GMT worked closely with the Israel Aircraft Industries, IAI, a major defense contractor for the Israeli military. Um, the founder of AIA was Adolf Schwimmer. The weapons arrangements with Iran during the rule of the Shah in secret after the Islamic Revolution. Schwimmer, who first concocted the idea to trade arms in exchange for the attempted release of hostage William Buckley. So, the next subchapter, I'm gonna go through kind of fast. This is, the one that we referred to earlier called Edmund Shafra Funny Bank. For those of you who don't know, Edmund Shafra, Safra, is a very interesting guy. Um, he was a combination of a Lebanese Brazilian businessman. Um, he has some very interesting ties. Um, there's 2 banks called Republic National Bank and Trade Development Bank, both of them headquartered in Geneva. Um, the Trade Development Bank was later sold to American Express in 1983. They originally were controlled by Safra, um, a billionaire. Um, the Republic National was among the 5 largest banks in New York. Safra himself died under suspicious circumstances after his bank was implicated in large-scale money laundering and possible theft of stabilization credits provided by the IMF to post-Soviet Russia. Now, what you need to look up is Safra in relationship to Magnitsky. If y'all don't know about Magnitsky, it's keeps coming up. He heralded himself as a Western investor going in after the fall of the Soviet Union and buying up their, industry to revitalize Russia, for the good of Russia. There's been a completely different storyline that comes along that says he was not doing that at all. Those of us who've investigated Operation Gladio know a couple of things. They de So all of the South American companies, I use Brazil because it was the starkest. They had over 50 very large, um, well-off Brazilian-owned companies doing, you know, well for everybody. The country's, prospering, and they elected somebody that the CIA didn't approve of. So, the international syndicate sends in the CIA to depose the president. They swoop in because of the terror that goes along with deposing a president, because it's a long drawn out, like Ukraine in 19, or 2014 or 2005 when they deposed president. There's a lot of instability. So the market crashes. These hawks, vultures is a better word, um, swoop in, buy up all of the, industry in, a rescue, is what they tell you, but it was premeditated. It was all on purpose. Um, when they were done with Brazil, there was, like, 5 companies left in Brazil that was Brazilian owned. The international syndicate had bought everything, and they have done this all over the world. It's despicable. Pennies on the dollar. You're right, Bridget. So, um, that's what's being described here, and Safra was involved in it. Now, he's going to die from being burned alive, okay? He supposedly, had security. They all take the night off, and this is so typical of a Gladio operation. There's a US military guy that's supposedly a, relatively new nurse, um, that's watching over that sets a fire to, 'cause the phone lines to, um, activate the smoke alarm that will get the fire department there, but oops, in the meantime, he leaves, and I'm not laughing, I am. Safra and whoever his personal assistant was had went into his safe room and burned it alive. So, that was they were in the middle of trying to destroy Russia and buy up all of their shit, like they've done everywhere else. Alright, so decades earlier, Republic National Bank, which is Safra's bank, um, participant were called La Mina, L-A, and then a separate word, M-I-N-A. There was a federal investigation done called Operation Polar Cap. La Mina, which washed money for Colombian drug cartels, um, had set up a daisy chain of banks, mines, gold refineries, precious metal brokers, jewelry stores, infrastructure, basically, and carrying drugs around. Basically, she took an entire paragraph where she coulda just said Operation Gladio. So, Republic National Bank is part of Operation Gladio. Um, money laundering for the drug cartels. One of the banks that factored into La Mina daisy chain was, oh, surprise, BCCI. Safra Trade Development Bank did business with loyal customers of BCCI, um, who and a guy whose name I'm not even gonna try to Altaf Nazarali, who was a high flyer in the world of security frauds. So you have Trade Development Bank and Republic National Bank that's gonna be discussed later. Um, but for here, it's important to know that Republic National is described as, quote, "handled many of the enterprise's wire transfers," unquote, money laundering. They they had a clandestine cash delivery system that took place outside of bank channels. Um, Nan Morabia was an officer at Republic National International Division. Her husband, Elliot, and their son, David, were basically the enterprise, they were like the couriers. So Willard Zucker is a money manager for this, Contra, enterprise set up. Um, ma so Zucker makes cash deposits to Hakim, Secord, and others. Zucker would contact Morabius, that family, those 3 people, and with the amount that was gonna be required for them to get, the amount was deposited into an account at Trade Development under a code. Then the money drops would take place at the other bank, Republic National Bank, and you have, she just gives you a couple examples of that. So in Nan Morabia's FBI 302, she had known Zucker for approximately 8 to 10 years and that his account at Republic National was already established when she started working there, so it's been going on for a long time. Safra had contact with Zucker in Geneva, she's telling them this, and the Republic National in that other entity, the CFS that we were just talking about, um, all of those are connected through this Republic National Bank of Safra's. You also had a Republic New York Corporation Air Transport Services Company set up that was a front company, the purpose of which was to maintain a private aircraft, on behalf of Safra's bank. Um, there was a couple other shell companies. Then there was a company called Aero Leasing. This was an aviation company contracted by the enterprise to ferry personnel around the world for various purposes. So this is very much like the entities that we saw talked about in Operation Gladio, and you had a gentle press in Portugal that produced all of the international passports and identification cards for these people to be transported around and have the ID once they got there. The enterprise's expenditure list included in the Congressional Iran-Contra final report showed under a section labeled Middle East Iran Arms, a total of 226,000 had been paid to the company. It's a lot of airfare, especially back then. We owe an aero leasing firm in Europe about $60,000, said another memo. Um, and then it said also, we still owe the Southern Air Transport, which is CIA, a bit of money. So they're admitting in these notes that they're using CIA front companies to ferry people around. Um, a guy that had wrote a biography on Robert Maxwell said that Safra and Maxwell had enjoyed a long-lasting friendship. They particularly enjoyed dining on board the Lady Ghislaine when the yacht was berthed in Safra's hometown of Monte Carlo. Safra allowed Maxwell to use Republic National Bank accounts to launder money that were coming in from Eastern Europe. So it also talks about Maxwell and Safra doing business in Bulgaria, which again is the weapons source for Eastern Bloc weaponry and the Black. Um, there's another company that comes up by the name of Kintex, Kintex, a state-owned trading company for Bulgaria, which came up in Operation Gladio as well. Um, and the basically, it's just talking about how it is a central player in intel, arms trafficking, blah blah blah. And then she says this: Kintex was more than willing to deal arms to right-wing insurgencies as much as left-wing. That statement right there is Kintex was an arms supplier to Operation Gladio, which is what they refer to as right-wing insurgencies. Um, so then she starts listing all of these different entities they supplied arms to, and they're all of the ones that came up in Operation Gladio. The Christian Phalangists in Lebanon, the Grey Wolves of Turkey, which 100% is Gladio. The Grey Wolves are the one that shot John Paul II. Um, and even the Nicaraguan Contras. So, close ties, between Kintex, this arms company, and Mohammed Shakari, a prominent, Geneva-based currency trader and the owner of Shakari Trading. He had offices near the Zurich airport, very sophisticated exchange and commodity trading operation, and he also was involved with Bulgaria and the arms and the CIA covert support to the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. Um, another front company called Argin, Argin, purchased for millions of dollars, um, using rare currency from Shikari's, operation. Uh, Shikari's US partners was Capcom, CAPCOM, a commodities futures firm that was created by the former head of BCCI's Treasury Department. Oh, look at that. Who capitalized it with funds from BCCI and BCCI's customers. So a classified DEA report said that Shakarchi's currency exchange services were utilized by some of the largest trafficking organizations to launder the proceeds of their drug activity, i.e. Gladio. Safra's Republic Bank is tied to all of that. So Safra's name can also be found in Jeffrey Epstein's contact book, because of course it can. However, he conveniently misspelled it as Safra's name is Safra, and it's spelled Saffra in his black book. Um, there's another guy, let's see, trying to think. um, there's a couple other banks, and, I wanna get down to George Soros here, that build around soccer, but there's a guy by the name of Edgar D. Picciotto, Picciotto, that, according to SEC filings, was a member of the board of advisors to Quantum Industrial Holdings, which is part of George Soros' network. Um, this guy is part of the, um he's very close to Safra, born in Lebanon, and he also is part of the money laundering network. So, um, it goes on to say that one of the advisors to which, let's see, back to the group. Quantum Industrial Holdings held the majority of the shares of Quantum Industrial Partners. One of the advisors to which was George Soros' brother, Paul Soros. Paul's son, Peter Soros, appears in Epstein's Black Book as well, with numbers both in New York and London. So another item appearing in Epstein's book is the Aero leasing company that's ferrying the money and the drugs around. So there's much more to Epstein than human trafficking. So, um, there's much more to George Soros, um, than what we think he's doing, because I'm telling you that places like Ukraine, where they have, no kidding, tracked money back to him that instigated the shooting in the, town square, which for those of you who are not familiar with Gladio, has been repeated, that exact operation, several times. Um, Another very well-known example of it was in Greece when they overthrew that government. Um, George Soros is in the heart of Gladio because he orchestrates and funds the stormtroopers. If If I was to take you through some of the Gladio operations that we have discussed in the past, you can see how Antifa and BLM, which we know he funds, are that type. This whole PLO thing, another example of stormtroopers that effect terror. What they are trying to do is to make it so people are afraid to protest the government. So if you're afraid to protest anything, you won't protest the government. And if we can knock out a few people during these mostly peaceful protests, they will then use that to turn around their domestic terror, apparatus on people who have absolutely nothing to do with domestic terror, like they did on January 6th. It's a round circle, and it's part of Operation Gladio, and that's why I get so frustrated. I say at least 10 times a day on social media, "Yeah, I know, it's called Operation Gladio. Just use the name, please." So, we're back to Aiden Khashoggi when we get to a bank called Mainland Savings. Um, so we're up to 1985. It was Aiden, Khashoggi who advanced the initial capital through his BCCI account to create this new bank. Um, there was Tony Roland, who we came across last, time, that's also involved in this, and remember that he's a British tycoon, corporate raider, and a member of the Claremont Club. Um, so Roland and Khashoggi, who's an arms dealer, get together, and a there's a bank called Mainland Savings, which is a Houston savings loan, and it's one of the ones that collapsed. Khashoggi's ties to Mainland savings date back to 1977 when Mario Renda, an ambitious New Yorker, um, stepped off a plane in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. He was a partner to a group called International Planners and Developers Construction, IPAD. Um, he wanted to build concrete homes in Jeddah, Jidda. Khashoggi, um, was basically part of the whole, venture, financially. So, that idea actually didn't pan out, but they became friends, and Khashoggi's, inner circle secured a position as a treasurer for him at the Arab International Bank. This is back in 1973. This bank had been a joint venture with a, um, organization called Londho Londro, I don't know, Lonrho, which is a corporate, huge entity controlled by tiny Roland. Um, Arab International Bank specialty was CD, and it had to do with people paying in petrodollars and how to keep the money and all of that other stuff. So, Arabus, Arabas, Inc. was a one-man firm that was intended to broker the deposits on behalf of the Arab clients. So, I'm just building a network here. In comes, Renda, the guy by the name of Martin Schwimmer, who we came across before, um, Schwimmer. He is the money launderer for the Luece crime crime family. They also use, pension funds from New York Union, Teamsters specifically. So Renda and Schwimmer began brokering deposits of union pension fund money into savings loans all over the United States. And Erebus is renamed First United Fund, and before you know it, Renda and Schwimmer is moving billions around in the savings and loan network. Um, Renda and Swimmer had deposited money in 130 savings and loans, all of which every single one of them were on the list that collapsed during the failed savings and loan fiasco. Renda's CDs were linked directly to massive borrowing at each of these institutions. Borrowing was carried out, through a network that was basically an organized crime associate membership list. The accusations of Swimmer's involvement in the Luce family and Renda's, were rumored to have controlled a lot of money being loaned for the benefit of a guy by the name of Paul Castellano, which was a powerful head of the Gambino family. So, just just to reiterate this, because we talked about this the last time we were on. The way what they do is they take pension fund money, they take drug laundering money, they put it into banks, unsecured loans are made on that money, and to the fractional lending of $9 for every $1 on deposit. So if you got $1,000,000, you're gonna loan out $9,000,000 and keep that $1,000,000. Those loans were unsecured. Then they take that money, put it over here, they'll move their 500 of that 1,000,000 over to this other bank, they'll do the same thing, they'll do the same thing, they'll do the same thing, and they just keep all of that money that was created out of thin air, which causes inflation, and that's how they rob us, and anybody who happened to have been in those savings and loans, um, I don't remember when the FDIC was formed, but sometimes you don't get all your money, um, and it goes through the whole destruction of screwing you for, the time that you don't have access to your money because they just, destroyed your bank, and it destroys entire neighborhoods. People loses their jobs, they don't care. So, anyway, um, Khashoggi uh, Khashoggi stays close to Renda, and, another guy by the name of Lawrence Orizio, who is a mobster, he's the president of a mob-linked Vantage Petroleum Company, and he's close to a guy by the name of Martin Carey, who's the brother of the New York Governor, Hugh Carey. And Hugh Carey, um, is the brother of Edward Carey, who is also an oil man. So Vantage had taken over Carey's Petroleum Combustion International Company, and they basically were bootlegging gasoline, to fund Hugh Carey's reelection campaign in New York. That just kinda shows the mafia, aspect of these clusters of people. So, she goes on and talks about how Erizio, being the mobster guy, was helping, Khashoggi put in a helicopter pad because they were running into problems with permits, and of course, they're in the mafia, so they know all the people that can fix all of that stuff, um for you with the details of that. But then we get back to, the Renda and Schwimmer doing the savings and loans, and how they would deposit stuff and then move that money to a shell company, and the loans never got repaid, um, and also part of that whole network was in Florida in the Sunshine Bank. I don't know if any of y'all recall that bank. They were basically doing the same thing there. Um, then among the savings and loan where Renda and Strimmer were brokering deposits of union funds was Houston Mainland Savings, the same savings and loan that was embroiled in the overly complicated financial transactions of Khashoggi, which we were just talking about. Um, and then she goes on and talks about how Khashoggi had bought a piece of property next to the Galleria in Houston, and, um, even, uh, Imelda Marcos gets in on this, because they're trying to he's wanted to build something there, and that got all screwed around, and he doesn't get to build something there, but then he doesn't wanna take a loss on the property, so all of these other people get involved, and the plan was that 30,000,000 in prior loans from Texas Commerce Bank and another savings and loan would be paid off, but he's gonna borrow money to do that, and basically, the whole thing gets all screwed around where, um He's they undervalue his Galleria property, so he doesn't have enough money to keep all the balls in the air here, um, and all of this is going on while they're still shipping, arms to Iran, and or from well, yeah, they're getting arms in Iran, and then they're taking arms from Iran and sending them to the Contras. So, they have a lot of crap going on, and you have the CIA and Mossad, um, and another guy by the name of Mansur Hourani, Hourani, is involved in this, and this Hourani guy was linked to Utah's Orrin Hatch, who was part of the BCCI, um, buying of First American. So, again, you just the the pulling in of our political people into these arms, money trafficking, um, is just crazy. It goes on and says, Hatch has more than one connection to this. In 1985, during the peak of his mainland borrowing and initiation of the Iran weapon sale, Khashoggi arrived in Salt Lake City with grand plans to build two gold-colored 43-foot office towers that would dwarf the nearby Mormon church. Khashoggi had been a presence in Salt Lake City since the 1970s and got even more active in 1980s. In '87, a construction on the tower had been abandoned, and Khashoggi had fled Utah, leaving numerous unpaid loans and broken promises in his wake. During this period, Hatch stated um, that he had met Khashoggi. Details on their relationship were scarce, but according to Hatch, their association with the senator extending the courtesies he would be to any other investor in Utah, which is garbage because he had been in repeated business deals through this entire saga with Khashoggi in Texas, Illinois, and Minnesota. So, what I found interesting is her next section, and it's gonna be our last for the day, is called Pan-European Plot. And for those of you who's been with me for a while, understand that the Pan-European Plot, um, falls right in line with the whole British Round Table fascist takeover of the world because, they refer to Pan America, Pan British Empire, and Pan Europe as part of the overall one world government. So they'll have a very small round table with people who's in charge of those pan, entities sitting deciding what's gonna happen with all of the rest of us. So I just find it ironic she named one of her subchapters under that. And this had to do with covert operations with respects to the complex trafficking of arms to Iran, Oliver North enterprises, and dipping their toes in all of the political and economic money laundering, blah, blah, blah. So this is where she gets into a lot of the detail of the people that were involved. And it's not surprising that you have a lot of the same people. Uh, However, couple of the new people were Swedish arm dealers, BAE, um, and more public relation firms, um, the Italian company SEA and Consar, CONSAR. All of these guys are involved in moving weapons around. Richard Secord is in there. Defects, DEFEX, a source for weapons from the Eastern Bloc. Um, and no shock here, International Bankers Incorporated is an entity that issues lines of credit to SEA and Consar. The Italian branch of International Bankers Incorporated was located where? Because we came across them before in Operation Gladio. They were in Banco Ambrosiano. Who was in charge of Banco Ambrosiano? Anybody? Anybody? Come on, you guys. That was Calvi, Calvi's bank, who was found strangled off a bridge in London because he was gonna cough up the details because they were gonna let him go to jail as part of Operation Gladio, because he was gonna rat them all out, so they killed him. So again, when she's describing this stuff, talking about these networks, she's not even aware of the much bigger, um, operation. Yeah, Orange. Yeah, he had thank you, Bridget, you're, right on it. He was tied with an orange rope, which is emblematic of the whole, Sicilian mafia, orange, um, and he had rocks in his pocket, signifying Masonic, and he had been shot in the back of the head. So, it was a Masonic P2, assassin kit, um, that they tried to pass off originally as a suicide. It was later redesignated as a murder, and, I had a guy somebody sent me an article yesterday that he had written on Substack, um, about, the oranges, and, um and he was saying that it had to do with the House of Orange and, blah, 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 and I said, "No, it doesn't." In the, Mafia Godfather, I said, "It has everything to do with the opium that was being shipped to that exact guy, that's it, represented in The Godfather." The Sicilian Mafia shipped directly to him, and they shipped via plastic oranges with all of those plastic oranges filled with opium. That's how they got it to him, and he was like, "Oh, that's not true." "Okay, sure, buddy." So, anyway, um I'm not gonna spend a lot of time here because now she's gonna talk about the stuff that happened in Italy and how all of that funding, was arranged since we already know that, because there's the Bank of Mali and the LLI, which we already talked about, and the Banca Internazionale, the BNL one. But you know what's interesting is she doesn't mention the Vatican, because we all know that all of these same people, to include the CIA and everybody that she's drawing attention to, um, all had dealings with the Vatican, and the Vatican was money laundering as well. So, but that's not mentioned here, which is why you have to read more than one book on every subject. Okay, so, let's go through just kinda breezing through this part because most of this stuff is stuff we've already, talked about. Um, and let's see, um so we have a guy that's in Belgium, by the name of Pierre, Salik. Um, and he's a clothing manufacturer that has close ties to Israel's Mossad. Um, he gets involved in this whole network, um, and I found him to be interesting, especially given the fact that, um, one of our most notorious Dutroux, I think it's Dutraux, was the, prolific pedophile that had tortured, and killed, um, just dozens and dozens of children, and basically had ran the Gladio pedophile network in, Belgium, and, um what I found interesting about the mention of that guy is he was involved in the whole modeling there because of his clotheslines, that he sold in Belgium, which would nicely fit with the whole, infrastructure that Epstein would set up as well for his, human trafficking. She doesn't mention anything about that. That's just on me from what we have read already. Um, and let's see. I think that's gonna about do it. The next, chapter, and I'm gonna wait till tomorrow or our next time to do this, has to do with guns for Iraq, because what I want everybody to understand is we just spent a whole, um, 2 hours dealing with weapons to Iran and to the Nicaraguans, and the whole network that was set up to accomplish that, from the White House all the way down to the guy writing the check or the woman carrying the money. That's an entire network of evilness that is set up to do that. But at the same time they were doing that, you would think, "Okay, well, if it's, good guy versus bad guy, you can almost say, okay, well, we were supporting the good guy, yeah, we were using drugs to pay for it or whatever." Somehow you can kinda rationalize. What you can't rationalize at all is this next section, which I'm gonna tell you they were doing exactly the same thing to send the same kind of crap to Iraq, who at the time was fighting with Iran. So, there's no morals, there's no principles, um yeah, I got you, Tara, and I was well aware of the fact that he was talking about the House of Orange, and there has been a lot of people that has said that in the past, that that's what that represented, but when you talk about the Rothschilds, and then you're talking about the mafia godfather, they don't even go together. I mean, it's like 2 different conversations. So, you can have the House of Orange and the Rothschilds and all of that over here, but the entire Godfather movie is about the mafia. So, when you're talking about the mafia and part of their legacy was drug running and them shipping in the Sicilian, and it's so extensive, the fact that Nixon went out on a limb and eliminated the Corsican mafia altogether just so that it could all be ran through Sicily, and so that made the mafia in New York even bigger, and the fact that they were running it into New York in plastic oranges, I mean, my head blew up when I read that. Um, and it was kinda we had just had a podcast about, somebody said in one of the podcast notes, "Do you know what the oranges meant?" And I'm like, "No, I never even thought about it." I had to go back and look through the movie, to even see what they were talking about. It didn't even stick out to me. And then, like, 2 maybe a week later, I was reading a section in the Gladio books that it wasn't even a book we were going over, it was another book I was and it said that they did that, package the opium in the plastic oranges, and my head just went, "Oh my god, I can't wait to tell everybody. We figured out the oranges." Um, that's just funny because that's why I love doing this with y'all. Um, together, we all learn a whole lot more. Um, there has been so many, helpful hints, there's been so many questions asked that are genuinely honest questions, and frankly, a lot of them I don't know the answer to. But it always sticks in the back of my head so that when I'm off reading, sometimes 2 or 3 other books at the same time, and I come across something that answers the question, immediately I can come back to it. And it's happened with other people. When we get off the podcast, Bridget or Julie or Liza, they take everything that we talked about and they go and look at different things, and then it it, allows us to fill in holes, and then have conversations with people that we otherwise couldn't have because we wouldn't have all the pieces. So, anyway, God bless you guys. Please, take a few minutes, when we get done and say a prayer for Julie, for her healing and, uh, good news from the doctors when they finish her 2nd MRI. Um, I really appreciate that and would take that as a personal favor. Um, I know Raven and Julie would very much appreciate it as well. So, again, thank you for being here, and, I will see you next time.